This is Alex. He lives in America, and he uses the US dollar every day to buy things like food and clothes. One day, Alex wants to visit Italy, where people use the euro. But when he exchanges his money, he finds out that one US dollar is worth only 85 euro cents. Then he travels to Japan, and suddenly his one US dollar becomes 110 yen. Wait a minute. Why is her money worth more in some countries and less in others? Why isn't all money the same value everywhere? And why does the exchange rate keep changing every second? In this video, we're going to explore the world of money, exchange rates, and why different currencies don't all have the same value. But before we understand why money has different values, let's take a quick trip back in time. For a long time, money was directly linked to precious metals like gold. This was known as the gold standard. Under the gold standard, a country's currency was backed by a certain amount of gold. For example, the US dollar used to be worth a fixed amount of gold. This made money more stable, because countries couldn't just print extra money unless they had enough gold. It stopped governments from printing too much money. But as economies grew and world trade expanded, countries started moving away from the gold standard. It became harder to keep enough gold for every piece of money, especially during wars and crises. By the 1970s, most countries left the gold standard and started using a new system called Fiat Money. This means money has value because governments decide it does, not because it is tied to gold. And people believe it. It's not backed by any physical asset like gold. That's why some people call it fake money. Unlike gold, fiat money has no real physical value. Its value comes from whether people trust it and want to use it. If many people want a currency, they will compete to get it, and its value goes up. If few people want it, its value goes down. So, the value of fiat money comes from supply and demand. That's why money from strong economies like the US dollar is usually worth more because many people around the world want to use it. But money from weaker economies like Zimbabwe, which had very high inflation, is worth much less because even the local people don't want to use it. So, in the next section, we will look at how supply and demand affect the value of money. Section 1. Inflation. Inflation happens when money loses its value. In simple terms, it means there is too much money compared to the amount of goods and services available. I have another video called, "Why Don't We Just Print More Money?" that explains this in detail. When a country has high inflation, its money becomes less valuable. Why? Because people don't want to use or save money that keeps losing value. Example, in 2020, you could buy 2 loaves of bread for $5. But with high inflation, by 2025, the same $5 might only buy 1 loaf of bread. You get less for the same money. A real-world case is Zimbabwe. In the 1980s, 1 Zimbabwean dollar equals 1.35 US dollars, worth even more than the US dollar. But because of bad land reforms, corruption, economic problems, sanctions, and printing too much money, the Zimbabwean dollar collapsed. By the 2000s, 1 US dollar equals more than 500,000 Zimbabwean dollars. The government tried changing the currency many times, but it didn't work. In the end, they started using more stable money like the US dollar and the South African rand. Today, Zimbabwe is still trying to bring back its own currency, so at least they never gave up. Section 2. Interest rates. You've probably heard of interest rates, but why are they so important? An interest rate is the cost of borrowing money shown as a percent. Example, if you borrow $1,000 with a 10% interest rate, you must pay back $1,000 plus $100 as interest. In every country, the central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US, decides the interest rates. When interest rates are high, investors can earn more money from their savings or investments. This attracts foreign investors, and to invest, they need to buy that country's currency. The extra demand makes that currency stronger. Example with government bonds. A government bond means you lend money to the government, and they promise to pay you back later with interest. If you buy a bond for $1,000 with a 5% interest rate for 10 years, you'll get $50 each year for 10 years. 10 years plus your $1,000 back at the end. So the idea is simple. Higher interest rates equal higher returns on investments. If US interest rates are higher than Germany's, investors may sell their euros, buy US dollars, and invest in American bonds or savings accounts. This extra demand makes the US dollar stronger. So the central bank needs to increase and decrease the interest rate based on the country's situation. And that's why everyone is afraid of this guy when he announces the US interest rate. Section 3. Country situation and foreign investment. In the late 1970s, China opened its market to foreign investors. After that, many international companies started building businesses in China. To open factories, these companies needed Chinese currency, yuan, to buy land, build factories, pay workers, and cover other costs. This created a big demand for the yuan, which made its value stronger and brought a lot of money into China. That's why many countries try to attract foreign investors, because it helps grow their economy and strengthens their currency. But foreign investors don't invest just anywhere. They prefer countries with stable politics and strong economies where their money is safer. Foreign businesses like to invest in countries with stable governments and economies. Why? If the government keeps its promises, like low taxes, businesses feel safe. But if the government suddenly changes the rules, like raising taxes, businesses can lose money. Too many protests or strikes also make it hard for businesses to work. A strong economy is important too, because if a country has too much debt or inflation, its money can lose value quickly, and investors worry about losing money. In short, stable rules plus calm politics plus strong economy equals safe place for investment. Section 4. Export and import. If Japan sells cars, buyers must pay in Japanese yen, so the demand for yen goes up. If Japan buys coal from Australia, it must use Australian dollars, so the demand for Australian dollars goes up. That's why countries try to export more than they import, to make their currency stronger. The US did something very smart. It made a deal with oil countries like Saudi Arabia to sell oil only in US dollars. Since all countries need oil, they all need US dollars. This made the dollar the world's most powerful currency, called the petrodollar. But small countries like Tuvalu don't have much to sell. Their money isn't used much, so they often use stronger currencies like the US dollar or Australian dollar for trade. Section 5. Fixed value. If a country wants its money to stay stable and strong without too much trouble, it can peg its currency to another, stronger one. Pegging means you fix your currency's value to another country's currency. Example 1. Brunei, a small rich country in Asia, tied its money to the Singapore dollar. 1 Brunei dollar equals 1 Singapore dollar. You can even use both in each country. Example 2. Belize near Mexico tied its money to the US dollar. 1 US dollar equals 2 Belize dollars. Super easy, just double or half the amount when exchanging. But here's the catch. When you peg, your country depends on the stronger one. If the US dollar goes down, the Belize dollar goes down too. Now you may wonder, why not just have one world currency, like a world dollar, so we don't need exchange rates at all? Sounds simple, right? But it's actually very complicated. Take the euro as an example. It's super convenient for people in Europe. You can travel between countries without changing money. But here's the problem. Every country has to give up control of its own money to the European Central Bank. This means if one country has a problem, it can affect all the others. For example, when Greece had a financial crisis in 2009, it caused trouble for other Euro countries too. Germany was not happy about that. So, if the whole world used the same money, it would be very risky. Imagine your country having inflation or crisis just because another country far away messed up its economy. One country's problem would become everyone's problem. Should we make our currency as strong as possible? The answer is, not really. Different countries have different needs when it comes to their currency. For example, a country that imports a lot, like Singapore, may want a strong currency to make imports cheaper. On the other hand, a country that exports a lot, like China, may prefer a weaker currency to make its products more affordable for other countries. This is why China has sometimes been accused of deliberately lowering its currency's value, a practice called currency devaluation. How does this work? I'll explain in another video. If you want me to make more videos explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.